now for Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I am Lindsay Aerts. Let's go inside Utah politics. Our program today focused on the spirited debate around the plans to sell off public lands across the United States. Senator Mike Lee's proposal in the Big Beautiful Bill has undergone some changes after public outcry and failing a Senate rules check to be included in the budget bill. Lee cut the proposed sale down from several million acres split between BLM land and Forest Service land to where now somewhere between 1.2 million and 600,000 acres of exclusively BLM land is in the new proposal. Now, this new proposal would also limit eligible land to be within 5 miles of a population center. Now, at the time of this taping, it's still unknown whether it will pass in the final version of the Big Beautiful Bill, but the proposal is certain to shape the debate over public lands as the Trump administration shapes its plans for the future. Well, I'm joined today by Jordan Hess. He is the Legislative Affairs Director for Washington City. They have said in the past how they are supportive of this proposal, largely for housing. First of all, Jordan, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so talk to me about, I presume you are in support of this proposal. Just talk to me about why.
Yeah, so we actually issued a statement 2 years ago in support of Senator Lee's Houses Act. The reason being 75% of Washington County is federally owned, and acreage sells for almost $400,000 an acre here in Washington City. It's really hard to build affordable housing when the land costs $400,000 per acre. So we have tracts of land right here within our city limits that are BLM land. We've done environmental studies on this land. There are no endangered species on these tracts of land. One piece particularly is 150 acres. Imagine how many units of affordable housing you could put on 150 acres. The problem is that land is untouchable because it's owned and managed by the BLM. So we're in support of the Houses Act and the provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill because it would open up that type of land for housing development, something that is critically needed in our community.
So I hear you that you have land in Washington City that is managed by BLM that you can't touch, that you think is underutilized. But the issue I'm sort of seeing as I watch this fight play out is that the definition that's in this bill doesn't specifically target that tract of land in Washington County, but creates a definition for where public lands can be sold. And when you apply that definition to, say, somewhere in Alaska, who knows where that housing could be built. So how does this bill narrow that? If what you're saying, you know, is maybe a good solution, we sell off some of this public land, but this definition is too broad to encompass these specific tracts.
I think some of the changes that have been made to these provisions are a step in the right direction. I don't know of anyone who's advocating selling off our national parks or our national monuments, the most pristine, beautiful land. I live 30 minutes from Zion National Park. I don't want anyone touching that national park. But the edits that have been made to the provisions say within 5 miles of a municipal boundary, must be prioritized.
Well, sorry, I'm going to correct you just a little bit because they say within 5 miles of a population boundary, which 5 miles from the boundary of Washington City could be a lot of land, even close to Zion or Arches.
Yeah, and it also prohibits the sell-off now of national forest land.
Right.
And so we don't have, the land around Washington City, it's a lot of barren, sandy dirt, right, that isn't pristine. We invest highly in our parks and in our trail system here in Washington City. We don't want to disrupt that, but there are tracts of land, like I said, that is perfectly suitable for this. And I like the fact that it's scaled down the amount of land that can be sold or transferred as well.
Yeah, so it scales down the amount, but again, I go back to that definition. The definition applies to all of these 11 states that are in the bill. I know there was a previous version with Congresswoman Malloy that seemed a little more targeted. Still, there were people up in arms about that provision too. But I mean, do you think we need to get a little more narrow with this definition?
I think we should, leave some flexibility for local communities to decide which land is suitable and which land is not. What I wouldn't want is this top-down, very heavy approach. I would love to see more input from the local communities, because our mayor and our council here in Washington City know exactly what land would be suitable and what wouldn't be. So I think some flexibility for local communities is a positive thing. Obviously, I do support some guardrails, like we've talked about, within 5 miles of a population boundary, suitable for land, not in national forest land, etc. I like some of those guardrails, but I also would love to see some flexibility for local communities.
Well, so the accusation among a lot of people is that Senator Lee is, again, working to sell off our public lands and our beautiful spaces. You see a lot of rhetoric, I think, on both sides, right, where you're seeing the conservation groups saying these are lands where we recreate and whatnot. And also part of their argument is there's already a process in place for the sell-off of public lands that has public input and all of that. And I understand this bill would have some of those provisions, but what do you make of the fact that they're still concerned that the budget bill is not the right place for the sell-off of public lands?
I've seen a lot of misinformation going around. I get Instagram stories, I'm sure you do, that say 250 million acres will be gone. It's nowhere near that much, right?
Well, that's how much the Wilderness Society calculated in the first version, right? So, yeah.
It's scaled down, much smaller amount that is now eligible, removing all of the national forest land as well. What I think is important here is it's all context. I looked at Virginia is 9% federally owned. Kentucky, 4% federally owned. Montana, 30% federally owned. Here in Utah, we're closer to 65% federally owned. I think to even the playing field, why not give us here in Utah some more flexibility on being able to develop this land? I don't think it's fair that 4% of Kentucky, but 65% of Utah is federally owned. Land prices here are sky high, especially down in Washington County. Having more of that land available will bring down the overall cost of housing. And I think that that is what's getting lost in this whole argument, or this whole debate, is we have residents right here in our own neighborhoods that cannot afford a home, cannot afford to live here in Utah. Unlocking some of this land will, in effect, make it easier for our own residents, our police officers, our teachers, our nurses, to be able to buy a home and live that American dream.
Yeah, so if you could craft this legislation, is Senator Lee getting it right here?
I think he is every day getting closer and closer to, I think, what is the right solution. And I applaud him for listening to the wilderness community, the hunters, the fishers, etc., the ranchers. I applaud that he is listening and making changes as the bill moves forward. I think it's getting to a really great spot.
Those hunters, fishers, anglers you mentioned, a lot of them have come out in opposition of this bill because they are worried sort of about this broad definition that we sort of talked about at the beginning. Do you feel like this version, or at least where he's getting to with this bill, protects the recreators, the hunters, the fishers enough? I know that people who have existing grazing rights or special permits like ski resorts can't be touched, anything like that. So again, I'm not suggesting that that there's this, we're going to build houses next to Delicate Arch, right? I agree that that's not the plan here, but still these groups are concerned that some of this land that they recreate on could be gone.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, he's made steps in the right direction regarding those specific groups. For example, taking all national forest land off the table. I think that was a good move for our hunters and our anglers. I also like that he's talked about earmarking some of the profit, some of the proceeds from this land to conservation and to beefing up some of our, hunting and fishing programs. I think that that's important to those communities as well, that they will actually get something out of this land sale as well to preserve the land and to keep it pristine for their hunting and their fishing.
Yeah, so right now, it's my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we already sort of have a process for land swaps and proceeds to go back into conservation to help those hunters and fishers and anglers and protecting people who use the land. And right now that proceed is like 90%, and now this bill would go to about 10% of the proceeds. Is that how you understand it? Or, I mean, are we still giving enough to fix sort of the backlog that's mentioned and all of that?
Yeah, and this, I don't think this proposal would eliminate or replace any of those existing programs. This is just an additional funding source that I think is appropriate. And you talked earlier about the process of land swaps or the process of accessing some of this BLM land for development. We've tried that. I've been back to Washington, D.C. And met with our senators and Congresswoman Malloy's offices to talk about attractive land that we would like. That does take an act of Congress. And so I think this is a better approach because it would prohibit individual cities and communities from having to go back one at a time and petition to have some of this land turned over for development. I think doing this in one big swath, I think, will help many communities across the West especially.
We're going to have to wait and see where all of this goes. Jordan Hess with Washington City, your Legislative Affairs Director. Appreciate your time, Jordan, and walking through this issue with us.
Appreciate it.
Well,
thanks.
Still ahead here on Inside Utah Politics. We're hearing the other side of the debate. The director of the Wilderness Society joins us after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts.
Well, welcome back. Our discussion of public lands continues now. Through this whole process of refining the sale plans in the Big Beautiful Bill, environmental groups have held firm in their opposition, arguing in part that the sale plans today represent a slippery slope to further privatization down the road. I'm joined now by Michael Carroll. He's the BLM campaign director for the Wilderness Society. He joins me from Colorado by Zoom. Michael, welcome to Inside Utah Politics.
Hey, Lindsay, thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. Okay, let's just start with this. Obviously, we have now a pared back version of some language, and we know that more versions could be coming out. But to what we're speaking to today, just talk to me about whether any of the changes that have come, taking out all the Forest Service land, now requiring BLM land to be within 5 miles of a population's boundary. Does that assuage any of your fears that just shopping malls are going to be built on Delicate Arch?
Well, yeah, let's say this for starters. The bill still, and the language still, mandates the sale of up to 1.2 million acres of public lands. So for us, that's still what's on the table here, which is an enormous amount of public lands. In fact, it would be the largest sale of public lands in U.S. history if the bill actually is enacted into law. So for us, public land sell-off is public land sell-off. I think with all of the iterations and the changes that Senator Lee seems to keep trying to get through the Senate, the ultimate goal here for him is establishing the precedent of selling public lands. And doing it through the budget reconciliation process is something that's very troubling and should be troubling to all of the viewers of Inside Politics, because really what it means is they're trying to get around the regular process where we would have the opportunity to have hearings, witnesses, and people testify on why these lands are important and why they shouldn't be sold off. So, the manipulation of the language that they keep trying to put into the overall reconciliation package, frankly, just doesn't have any of the regular order involved in it. And it's very troubling to us because there's no ability for the public to actually chime in and comment on it.
Well, I want to push back on what you say is manipulation of language. Do you really believe that the senator is going in here and trying to mislead people on what is going to be sold and what could be sold? Or do you believe it's sort of more like the definition is too broad and they haven't got it narrowed down yet?
Yeah, look, I think the goal that we've seen through the various iterations, we're now on to the third, we're hearing there's going to be a fourth, is really to establish the precedent for selling federal public lands. I think the senator's intention and the intention of the legislation initially was really to try and sell off a number of places, across the public lands estate. I think the narrowing that you're seeing in the language that he's putting forward is in part because of the overwhelming pressure that we've been seeing from communities across the country of everyone from hunters and conservative folks that don't want to see their favorite fishing or camping areas sold off to environmental organizations and conservation organizations like mine. I think the intention here is to try and get the precedent established so that then into the future, in other budget reconciliation processes and bills, we can see public land sell-off become just part of the makeup of a public or of a budget reconciliation package. And we'll see a whittling down and a chipping away of the public lands that we all care about.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say you see it sort of as a slippery slope, right, to other sell-offs and stuff like that. I want to play you a clip from the senator last week when he was on, I believe it was Glenn Beck, yes, and he had some choice words about your organization, and he's really pushed back, actually accusing you guys of fear-mongering in a way and releasing maps that kind of spun up fear a little bit. So let's take a listen to this, and then I'll have you react to it.
And look, the map being circulated by the left-wing Wilderness Society, run by President Biden's own BLM director, eco-terrorist, Tracy Stone Manning, is flat out misleading. First of all, when this bill puts land up, puts it in the category of eligibility for sale, it doesn't mean for sale. It just means there's a process by which it could be transferred. That's impossible right now.
So he's saying that the sale, doesn't necessarily mean we're selling in this bill. It means we're just creating a process. But he also called your organization an eco-terrorist organization. How do you respond to that?
Look, I think when the senator is trying to rile up his base, I think it helps him to try and call names and create a boogeyman from a conservation organization that's out there. That's one of the oldest conservation organizations in the country, been working steadily for years and years and years to try and protect public lands across the West. His criticism of our map is interesting because the senator has had every opportunity to put out his own map, to show his own data, to share his own information about what the language in his legislation actually means for places on the ground. And he hasn't done that. He's chosen to not do that and to criticize those folks who do try to do that. The Wilderness Society, the Outdoor Alliance, and other organizations have all put out our own maps individually. The Wilderness Society worked hard to make sure that we were as transparent as possible with our map. You can go to our website, wilderness.org, go to our map page and the page that has our map of his proposal, and take a look at it. We have all the data layers, the methodology laid out there, everything we put into interpreting the language that's in his his proposal, and then how we interpreted that, and then ultimately created the map. At the end of the day, the language that he has in the bill, when you map that language, or at least in the second iteration of his bill, was 258 million acres. We stand by that map. We recognize that what's on the menu, what's available to be chosen from for sale, is not necessarily what's on the plate. What he mandated for sale in that second iteration was 3 million acres. We've said that all along, but we wanted people to understand very clearly what areas could be chosen from in their backyards that could make up that 3 million acres that could be sold off.
So obviously the justification for this sell-off is, or the eligibility of the lands, right, is housing, right? Cities say they need some of this land, this underutilized land, areas that are not being used or that are hard to manage within existing city boundaries sometimes. Are there, do you acknowledge that there are some parcels that aren't being used and or managed very well that could apply to this housing situation? Or is your organization, and maybe even you personally, just a hard and fast, no public land sale in this way?
Well, let's be clear. We're a hard and fast no public land sale through budget reconciliation, right? This is not the venue to do it. If you're going to sell federal public lands, the American people's lands, you should have a full process with hearings, witnesses, bringing people in to debate the particulars about those particular land, or the different land sales that would be included in a package like that. With regards to public land sales, the Wilderness Society totally understands that there are needs for public lands in different communities that could help to alleviate the housing crisis. However, there are existing processes that the agencies have, both the Forest Service and the BLM, that they can go through to actually work with local municipalities to meet those communities' needs. We believe that those agency processes can totally be streamlined, and we should do that. Interestingly enough, the proponents of selling off public lands have often been on the side of cutting the federal agencies' budgets, right? If you're going to have a federal agency who can regularly execute on whether it's public land sales or the management of those public lands, they need to be fully funded by the Congress. Cutting those agencies' budgets doesn't help to alleviate or help to create agencies that actually can address these needs and use those regular processes for potentially selling off public lands or trading public lands for community needs. So it's a tough conundrum for a lot of these folks, but no, the Wilderness Society has all along said that, where there are community needs and public needs, we should have those conversations, but they shouldn't be done through budget reconciliation.
Michael Carroll with the Wilderness Society, appreciate your time today and coming on here to answer a lot of questions about this public land sale, and we'll have to continue to wait to see if it's in the bill, if it passes, if it comes back in another form, whatever happens with it. We appreciate your time.
Lindsay, thank you.
All right, coming up here on Inside Utah Politics, Utah lawmakers sounding off on Iran, what they make of the president's move against the country's nuclear program. We'll be right back. Well, the war between Israel and Iran remains one of the top concerns in Washington as President Trump demands the two countries maintain a ceasefire. Now, some of Utah's delegation is weighing in on the war and the president's decision to strike Iranian nuclear sites. The U.S. deployed B-2 bombers and Tomahawk missiles to hit uranium enrichment facilities at 3 different locations. Now, Senator John Curtis on CNN applauding the president for taking decisive action.
I think everybody's reaction needs to be incredibly positive. We started this day with a lot of turmoil, a lot of uncertainty, not sure if Iran was going to strike and how they would strike. And not only do we have the ceasefire, but we have a very unusual strike from Iran where they notified us it was going to happen. Very symbolic, but not a real serious one. And now tonight, the hope that we're actually tying a bow around this and can move forward with peace in the region is just great news.
Now, obviously, those comments earlier this week. Now, some in Congress argue the president acted without getting the proper go-ahead from lawmakers. Utah Representative Blake Moore tells C-SPAN that while he can respect that point of view, at some points, he says the president needs to be able to act quickly and unilaterally.
I think there's a small group of bipartisan members that don't want the president to have any ability to do anything, and then the majority of us say that there's some limited capacity. It's a very difficult aspect to get through, but it's a simple argument. If we would have briefed Congress on the raid in Abbottabad, I highly suspect Osama bin Laden would have gotten word of this, that would have been leaked, and he could have escaped.
Well, the president, for his part, says Iran's nuclear program has been seriously set back, if not destroyed, and has made no indication that he's planning more strikes. The supreme leader of Iran is also claiming victory. Well, now to this. Governor Spencer Cox has put the controversial public labor union collective bargaining referendum on the ballot for next year's general election. But ABC4 News has confirmed that lawmakers are in talks with the labor groups to possibly change the law before that vote happens. Now, the law bans collective bargaining for groups like teachers and firefighters. And if the legislature does nothing, voters will decide whether to repeal it next November. But the law's sponsor says he's hoping the groups can strike a deal. The labor unions tell us that they've met with Representative Jordan Tusher and stand firm in their belief that the law harms public employees. Well, Governor Cox is now the chair of the Western Governors Association. He received the gavel this week at the conclusion of WGA's 2-day conference in Santa Fe, New Mexico. With the title, now Cox says he wants to focus on creating an abundance of energy in the region. The governor also stated his energy initiative will investigate challenges and try to find opportunities to build a reliable, secure, and affordable grid. Well, that's going to do it for today's Inside Utah Politics. Don't forget, if you have any local political stories you'd like to see, make sure to reach out. Email me, InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow along with me on social media, X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, Lindsay on Air, and Lindsay spelled with an A. You can also find our show in podcast form wherever you podcast. Just search for Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts. Well, thanks for being with us, everyone. We will see you next week.